Believe it or not, there was a time where Phoebe Waller-Bridge was seen as this quirky, authentic woman within British theatre and television. She was witty, she was awkward, and she was just edgy enough to get the media drooling over her. Then, unfortunately, Hollywood noticed and decided to choose her to be the saviour of franchises that are either dead or dying. People seemed to like and appreciate her messy and relatable style, but when Hollywood came calling, suddenly she wasn't the underdog anymore. She was the corporate fixer who was wheeled in to sprinkle feminism and quips over multi-billion-dollar dinosaurs. If there's one thing fans hate more than being patronised, it's seeing their childhood heroes being torn down and replaced right in front of their eyes.
That is one big pile of shit.
Phoebe Waller-Bridge was born in Hammersmith, London in 1985. She went on to do what most aspiring British actors do, and she headed to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. She spent 3 years learning how to act, basically, and she walked out in 2006 with a diploma and the connections that come with it. From there, she went into theatre and she co-founded a small theatre company called Drywrite with her friend Vicky Jones in 2007, where they produced and performed in a bunch of plays. It was solid work, but nothing really noteworthy. At least that was the case until a play called Midady came along, which was the turning point. It was critically acclaimed, it was seen as bold, and it was the project that implied that she had potential. As a result, she got the attention of a few television networks, and by the late 2000s, she began slipping into minor TV and film roles. So how did Phoebe Waller-Bridge go from small cameos in a few TV shows and films to billion-dollar franchises? Simple. She made stuff that people actually cared about. First came the sitcom Crashing in 2016. It was a quirky little sitcom about a group of people squatting in a disused hospital. All of that is all well and good, but the series Fleabag was the big one. What started off as a one-woman stage play turned into a series on the BBC, and suddenly, Phoebe was a big deal. So why did people seem to love this series so much? Well, for starters, it had personality. It wasn't just another safe, committee-written sitcom, but something that felt like it came from one person's slightly deranged brain. Every line was filled with wit, bitterness, and that kind of awkward honesty that makes you laugh and cringe at the same time. Then there's the whole fourth wall breaking thing. Yeah, characters talking to the camera isn't new, but in Fleabag it wasn't just a gimmick. It was a coping mechanism. It was her way of controlling the chaos. Fleabag worked because it was sharp, messy, and unafraid to be ugly. A very personal, very specific little show about one woman's disasters. So naturally, Hollywood took one look at that and said,
"Oh my God, yes."
This is the perfect person to bring in to write on our James Bond script. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, for logic-defying reasons, was brought in late on during the script writing process for James Bond No Time to Die to give the movie a feminist touch-up. That meant tidying up the female characters, polishing the dialogue, and making sure that the franchise looked respectable for the so-called modern audience in 2021. They tried to retrofit feminism into one of the most proudly male-dominated franchises in history.
Not too sure that was a clever move.
So first up, there's the character that Ana de Armas plays called Paloma, who teams up with Bond for a small part of the film, but then she vanishes from the movie, like, after just 10 minutes. Critics and the audience seem to like the character, and ironically, she was probably the best written female character in the film. And yet she feels like a cameo. It's almost like the writers wanted to prove, see, we can do modern, capable women who are likeable, but then they don't commit to it, so it comes across as tokenism rather than storytelling. And then there's the bigger problem, which is Lashana Lynch's character, Nomi, or Nomi, or whatever. Point is, she's the new MI6 agent, and now she has the 007 title, Bond's iconic code number, now that he's retired. Now, the second you give a brand new character, a young, diverse female character, that specific code number, you're effectively waving a red flag in front of a bull at this point. Fans weren't stupid, they could see what was going on. The most iconic label in the entire franchise being ripped off of Bond and slapped on someone else as a statement. And then the script keeps hammering this point home and putting Bond down. Constant lines like, "I'm 007 now, stay in your lane, I could shoot you in the knee."
The one that works.
Shut up, bitch!
Instead of being written as a capable spy in her own right, she's defined almost entirely by putting Bond down. Bond fans didn't want a lecture, they wanted to see Bond just being Bond. The real problem with bringing in someone like Phoebe Waller-Bridge to modernise Bond is that it wasn't just a creative choice, it was a political statement. It says the character you loved is problematic, so we're going to fix him. And when you tamper with that formula, when you start worrying about how female characters feel about him instead of what Bond does, you break the fantasy that made it work in the first place. After being branded as the woman who came in to feminise 007, she turned up in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, a movie that basically does exactly the same thing to Indiana Jones. Now, to be fair, Phoebe Waller-Bridge wasn't a writer or a producer on this one, but when you've already been branded as the woman who feminized James Bond, now stepping in to replace Indiana Jones?
You're braver than I thought.
Her character, Helena Shaw, is Indiana Jones's goddaughter. She's cheeky, smug, and apparently 10 times smarter than the man who spent 40 years punching Nazis and saving history. And to be honest, Phoebe's acting didn't help. Half the time she's smirking like she's too clever for the movie she's in. It's meant to come across as witty, smart and rebellious. Instead it feels condescending and insincere. Meanwhile, poor Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones himself, gets the Luke Skywalker treatment. Once a heroic adventurer, now he's an aging, bitter, depressed relic of the past. Basically, the film spends 2 hours reminding you of how sad and washed up your childhood hero has become, while propping up his younger, more diverse replacement. So you can understand why audiences got angry. Here was a beloved franchise serving up a miserable version of Indiana Jones and positioning Phoebe Waller-Bridge as the new hero. Combine that with her Bond reputation and boom! She's now the face of feminism and the poster girl of Hollywood's obsession with replacing your favourite characters. And if Indiana Jones wasn't enough to make people suspicious, behind the scenes she had already signed a massive deal with Amazon. The pitch was simple: give Phoebe Waller-Bridge a mountain of cash and let her cook. The result? Well, a lot of projects started and a lot of projects died, but some of those things did happen. Like she narrated a weird octopus documentary for some reason, and she's attached to the upcoming Tomb Raider series. So Phoebe Waller-Bridge hasn't had a downfall in the sense of losing all her work, because she's still in demand. The downfall is reputational. She became the face of Hollywood's worst habits, forcing identity politics into beloved franchises, tearing down established heroes while propping up smug replacements and calling it progress. At the end of the day, did Phoebe Waller-Bridge ruin James Bond, replace Indiana Jones, destroy cinema as we know it? No, probably not. But that's not really the point. The point is, once you become the symbol of a trend that audiences hate, there probably isn't a way back for you. And that's the blunt truth of it.